Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Rachel Friedman. I'm the Research Communications Manager for the Office for the Advancement of Research here at John Jay. I want to welcome you to the third and very final book talk of the fall semester, so this is an exciting one. It's also very unique because we are welcoming Alex Long today, an Associate Professor of English, to read from his book On Distance, and it is a collection of poetry which, to the best of my knowledge and experience here at John Jay, we have not done as an OER book talk before. So this should be a really fun and unique talk today. On Distance is Alex's fourth full collection of poetry. His third still life won the White Pine Press Poetry Prize. Say that 3 times fast. Alex's work, which has been nominated for 15 Pushcart Prizes, has appeared in the Southern Review, the American Poetry Review, and more. He's not only a poet, but a musician, I'm told, which I think will be evident today upon hearing the cadence and the rhythm of his poetry as he reads. We're also delighted to be able to welcome today 2 of Alex's colleagues from the English department as discussants, who will help to open up the meaning behind the poetry and explore what it means to be a writer and a reader of poetry. We have Dr. Allison Pease here today, who's currently the Associate Provost for Institutional Effectiveness, as well as a professor of English. Allison is the author of several books on modernism, feminism, and culture, including the 2018 Modernism, Sex, and Gender. We also want to welcome Dr. Dale Barleben, an associate professor, also in the English department, who focuses on British modernist literature and has a background in studying and practicing law, which he incorporates in his current scholarly work. Dale has written a book on the interactions between literature, culture, and the law, Staging the Trials of Modernism, Testimony and the British Modern Literary Consciousness. So without further ado, I think our snacks are here, which is exciting. But give them a few minutes to get into the poetry before you rush over and get something to eat. So please give them a round of applause.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming here. And thanks, Rachel, and all the good folks at OAR for inviting me. Thanks. I was going to call you Dale, but I guess I should call you Professor Barleben. I'll call you Dale. Thank you, Dale. Thank you, Allison, for agreeing to soften the blow of me being up here. So let's get down to the poems. I shall begin with a poem, and then I'll field some questions from colleagues, and we'll go for about 40 minutes or so, and then you, the audience, will have the opportunity to ask questions if you are so inclined. Okay? So this poem is titled On Race, and those of you who are not jazz aficionados, you probably need to know that Bessie Smith was a jazz and blues singer. She was the most popular of her time in the 20s and the 30s. She was kind of the Beyonce of her time. Who else is mentioned in here? Clifford Brown was a jazz trumpeter. Ron Carter, a bassist, and Oscar Peterson was a pianist, a fellow Canadian. Oscar Peterson, Dale. Quiet Riot, if you don't know who Quiet Riot is, just do a YouTube search and you'll be amazed, or amused, or both. Okay, so this is On Race. And it has an epigraph from Booker T. Washington. Cast down your bucket where you are. Bodie Estes claimed it was his chair, but I was sure that it was mine. I had, after all, my arithmetic and history books, my glimmering new Trapper Keeper, my cursive copybook, and all the proof I thought anyone would need. My signed copy of the Second Vatican's Council of the King James Bible, quote, for all God's children ages 7 and up. Bodie, and therefore I, had a problem. The chair was no ordinary chair. It had a shelf below the seat built in to place one's books, leaving free the well of the desk where one could hide a football, whoopee cushion, slingshot, and, if you were Andy Danella, your Quiet Riot LPs and Playboys. If you were naive, you thought yourself blessed to have been assigned a place with one of the coveted double-decker chairs. And who knows? Maybe that's how the nuns partitioned us out, because they didn't use anything as arbitrary as the alphabet, height, aptitude, or skin color. The Holy Spirit Elementary School was easily half black, and those of my classmates who were came literally from the other side of the SEPTA R2 line, the part of Sharon Hill known as Darby Township, where there were no yards but for the one in which Bessie Smith is buried. Before the end of Jim Crow, my father went to the Sharon Hotel bar hoping to catch the next Clifford Brown or Ron Carter or Oscar Peterson. Never once, he told me more than once, did he feel fear there. Well, maybe once, he said. Bodie lived above the Sharon Hotel bar, his father a non-paying regular whom everyone forgave what he owed them. No one was dumb enough to complain. No one dumb enough to ask Bodie how he had a mustache in 5th grade. Not even the nuns, who ordained him unfit and unworthy of a good chair for him to sleep off his father's whoopings while the rest of us took copious notes on salvation from original sin. It's to Bodie I owe my salvation. One day he decided he wanted my chair. He rose, walked over, called out my name. When I ignored him, he tapped me hard on the shoulder. When I refused to give in, this was Andy Danella's sage advice, Bodie swept the chair out from under me. My ass hit the floor first, then my back, and then my head. When I came to, the class stood round me in a ring. Bodie held out his hand, and when I took it, I could feel 400 years of fear coursing between us like a cross on fire.
So Alex, when I read this poem the first time, I was intrigued by the characters, and I started to wonder, how many of these characters are real? Do you, are these people from Sharon? I know you grew up in Sharon Hill, and I wonder how much do you actually construct the characters? Are they, brought together from real people? And then how much does nostalgia figure in the way that you construct these poems?
Yeah, the names haven't been changed to protect the innocent or the otherwise. Those are names of my classmates. Bodie was a big, imposing dude when you're 11. I think he was maybe 13 or 14. Nostalgia's tricky because nostalgia, you can sort of, you can devolve into navel gazing, making it all about me, and you have to remember that this, even though it's from a personal experience, you have to consider that hopefully there's going to be a larger audience out there. So whenever I feel a nostalgic poem taking shape, or when I become cognizant of it taking shape, I try to keep myself in check and maybe shift gears into something more like bearing witness rather than simply looking back on my life and my own memories, which are what they are, but there has to be a larger context in place, even if it's just in the foreground. And I'm placing my experiences, or in the background rather, and placing myself in the foreground to try to have a balance of the two.
I think that's probably really sage advice for aspiring poets too, because I remember my ninth grade language arts teacher, his name was Mr. Crystallized, and he said poetry is that language that says more and says it more intensely than does ordinary language. And so he was a poet and then began to recite poetry about his grandmother, and it was so non-intense and so exactly what you were saying. It was all about him, and he put a ninth grade class to sleep. But your poems always have so much power, and I think a lot of it has to do with exactly with what you just said. Yeah. So thank you.
I guess he needed a more interesting grandmother. I don't know.
Speaking of power, you start this poem with the epigraph from Booker T. Washington's Atlanta Compromise speech. And if you don't know the Atlanta Compromise speech, Booker T. Washington is African American speaking in Atlanta, and speaking to a South that is recovering from slavery, and basically suggesting that it's important for whites and blacks to trust one another. That he uses, the casting down your bucket is a bucket of a ship where, a ship thinks that it's, without water, and people keep not radioing, I don't know how they're signaling to it, just cast down your bucket where you are. They discover that they're at the mouth of the Amazon River, it's fresh water, and they can actually get sustenance from right where they are. So the metaphor that Booker uses there is that, whites and blacks in the South, just cast down your buckets where you are. You're here together, trust one another. In contrast, your poem is about fear, right? A lack of trust. And you end in 400 years of history and a burning cross, right, which is connoting the Ku Klux Klan's white intimidation of blacks. You also talk about original sin. And I would say that our nation's original sin is slavery. So, this seemingly simple poem about an interaction between fifth graders is actually also about our country's history and in between two individuals, right? And I found your end image kind of disturbing, right? It's a violent act, and yet you call it your salvation. Is violence our way out of sin? Or
I hope not.
history, or this mess we're in?
A precedent would say yes. My maybe naive hope is no. But I guess to speak anecdotally, that interaction with Bodie, him basically knocking me on my ass, woke me to his experiences. Years later. And when I was 11, I didn't.
You didn't see it right then?
No, it didn't dawn on me of, I didn't, all that stuff. But it was a leveling experience. So there was no hierarchy anymore between Bodie and myself, or between black and white. And I consider that in America, that seems as close to salvation as we might get from the original sin of slavery. But that's only anecdotally, right? So.
That sounds like a good segue for your next poem.
Yeah. This poem is called On Forgiveness, and in terms of context, the names of my classmates at the end of the poem are my classmates from Holy Spirit Elementary School in Sharon Hill, Pennsylvania. And for maybe 2/3 of the poem, I discuss the Rwanda Genocide from 1994. Okay. And this is called On Forgiveness. I don't know what it means, but I try to do it and mean it. And I don't know what it means. How is that possible? In Rwanda, after the genocide, President Kagame made it a law for the Hutus to live side by side with the surviving Tutsis, the same Tutsis whose family members they slaughtered, not with gas or guns, but with machetes. 800,000 were slain in a month. The math alone puzzles the soul, a feat not even the Nazis or Stalin could accomplish. Kagame's plan in placing the slaughterers in such close proximity with their survivors was to engender a culture not only of acceptance but also forgiveness. Each village would hold trials in which the Hutus would confess to hacking to death a Tutsi, or more likely Tutsis, and the Tutsis would be required by law to forgive the man, or sometimes the boy, who slaughtered often an entire extended family. But perhaps what's most astounding is that Tutsis and Hutus lived side by side before the genocide. They were and are intermarried, had and have children together. So yes, What you are thinking is inexplicably correct. Brother-in-law killed sister and brother-in-law. Uncle hacked off limbs of a niece or nephew. Son-in-law raped mother-in-law while father-in-law watched, or appeared to watch, while blood trickled out the corners of his mouth, eyes, and ears. These trials, Gakaka, were met with deep suspicion and full compliance, and according to Kagame, have helped rebuild, among other things, Rwanda's infrastructure. But the mind and the soul, faculties we each possess and know so little about, what swirls inside them once the verdict is given, the punishment divvied out? What's a decent image to put down in ink by a stranger so removed like me, like you? Do Bodie Estes and Kyle Ross and Cassandra Warr forgive me for being white, or do I forgive them for being black? Do we laugh it off over a couple of beers at a grade school reunion and find some solace in a common enemy, Sister Amadeus, the United States of America, the Catholic Church? Does a winter wind chafe our skin that much less? Is our sleep any less terrorized? I'm thinking of our eyes, all of them leaking what they're made of, what makes up most of the only planet we've been given.
So this poem on forgiveness, like on race, takes Paul Kagame, right, and on race takes Booker T. Washington, these two sort of conciliatory figures. And it seems to expose them as too simplistic. Both of these poems carry this just heavy, almost unbearable burden of history that we seem unable to escape. Which brings me back to your opening lines. Right? So your opening lines are, I don't know what it means, but I do try to do it and mean it, and I don't know what it means. Why is forgiveness impossible to define?
I think perhaps because it is such an intensely personal experience that it's so personal that reaching the other is impossible. It's not possible. I was raised Catholic. I'm now a recovering Catholic. And I've been told probably a couple hundred times that I've been forgiven, going to confession and so forth. And could have fooled me. I don't feel forgiven. I'm still laden with that Catholic guilt. So saying it and feeling it, believing it, are completely two different things in my experience. Forgiveness is also kind of like empathy. Empathy is kind of a buzzword it's been thrown around maybe the last decade or so, certainly more so since November 8th, 2016, and the lack thereof. But we throw empathy around too casually, too, because empathy, like forgiveness, is so intensely personal. I don't know what's going on up in your head.
No, I don't either.
I mean, I don't know what's going on inside another. I know when I have forgiven someone, but that person doesn't necessarily know. The saying of it and the believing of it don't coincide with my experience. And just one more brief anecdote, and then we'll turn it over to you, Dale. This was the camel that broke the straw's back. The straw that broke the camel's back in terms of my Catholic faith. I was in a toxic relationship long in another life, and I committed a serious betrayal to help passively, aggressively sabotage the relationship and basically force her to end things. Unforgivable, right? I was too weak to fess up and just face what had to be faced. And I was racked with guilt about it. I was just torn up by it. So I was still on speaking terms with my Catholic faith at the time, so I said, okay, I'll go to confession. and I'll tell the priest, and I'll feel better, right? So I go, and I tell the priest, in the box with the screen, and we're kneeling down and the whole thing. And if you're not Catholic, you have no idea what I'm talking about. But anyway.
I've seen movies.
Yeah.
That's right.
And I finished, and at the end of confession, the priest gives you penance. Go say 10 Hail Fathers and 4 Our Marys or whatever. And I was waiting to get a penance of, Hail Marys and Our Fathers into the triple digits, because I was the worst human being in the history of mankind who had committed the most heinous offense in the history of mankind, so forth and so on. And the priest said, "You may go now." And I said, "Well, where's my penance?" And he said, "You're forgiven. You've suffered enough." So, okay. I got out of there, and I was confused, and I was pissed, because I didn't get to gnash my teeth. I didn't get to wear my hair shirt. I didn't get flogged, and I sure as hell wasn't forgiving myself. So this priest, God, through this priest, if you're Catholic, God said, "You're good, man, you're good." I said, "No, I'm not." So I don't know if
You juxtapose the Rwandan genocide again with the Sharon Hill characters. And I'm just, we talk about juxtaposition all the time in English lit classes. And when I was reading this poem, it did jar me a little bit, because I was reading along, I was reading about the alternative dispute resolution that was imposed on the Tutsis by Kagame, and how heinous and crazy it was.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, there was Bodhi again, juxtaposed with this. I'm just wondering, are you trying to reconcile these things? What are you doing with that juxtaposition?
Well, I think I'm probably doing something unforgivable, putting genocide next to my experience and trying to hold them up as something equivalent. I can understand why that would be, why one would think I would try to suggest that, but that's not what I'm trying to do, though. I mean, you should have rethought the poem. Too late now, it's in print, and I'm reading it to a group of people. Oh, well. I think I'm trying to put myself and my experiences, again, within some sort of larger context. And perhaps full-heartedly trying to make connections between something as large and heinous and unimaginable as the Rwanda Genocide to my own little experiences, and to throw that in to the crucible of my imagination and memory, and see what gets spit out. I guess it's kind of an experiment, maybe, yeah. But no, I'm not, there is no equivalence between my life and the Rwanda Genocide. I just want to make that absolutely clear.
All right, another one?
Yeah, I think I'm going to skip the prose poem, just for interest of time.
You're going to skip Primo?
Yeah, I think probably that's best, because it's just an interest of time. And we've already had enough heaviness. Not that there's any lightness in this book, but shall we move on to section 3 of the poem On the Image? Okay.
Sounds good.
All right. As you know, those of you who have the book, or perhaps will get the book, On the Image is a long poem. I'm not going to read the entire poem. I'm just going to read one section of the poem. And this section brings back my ex-father-in-law. And the philosopher Spinoza. Okay. And this section opens with me remembering words from my ex-father-in-law. That there, son, yep. That there might be a, what did you call it? Image? I get that. Right as rain, I get that. It's about time. My ex-father-in-law says this to me one day as we walk through the arches of the Gettysburg National Cemetery. Here's the thing. He says it and says it and says it and says it still into my ear, nearly 20 years gone now. He says it and smiles, pats me on the shoulder. Then he's gone again. But just because he shot himself doesn't make him gone. The image brings him back all the stronger with such indisputable cacophony and euphony of images, I guess, that would make Whitman and Lorca spit with confusion and frustration and ecstasy. A good man, my ex-father-in-law. What transfixed him so before he pulled the trigger is an image. A picture of his wife, who smoked these long, brown, slender cigarettes called Moore with menthol, who died of cancer a month before he shot himself. A good man whom I love. And I wish I could share with you what transfixed him so, which must have been desire, which Spinoza claims can set even stones free. Maybe my desires are nothing more than witnessing a red fox disappearing, then reappearing among gravestones, older than America, younger than South Sudan, or an ant walking without any discernible effort vertically up a screen door, where at the top is not much else than a thin film of dusty grit, a husk or two of last summer's wasps, and a cigarette I'd placed the October before last, when I vowed to the pine tree that never fails to wave hello and nod in affirmation, never to reveal my most pressing questions, broken resolutions, unfinished epistles. Or maybe my desires are where a scarecrow's eye once was, a chipped black button dangling, black thread dripping from the socket in the sackcloth face, that phrase up and across, a hashtag of absence. And maybe that's all the 45th president has in his brain, hashtags of absence. One thought grabbing the next by the crotch because it can and will, without anyone's say-so. For desire hasn't as much purpose as permission. And maybe my train of thought isn't all that different after all. What was it Spinoza said? Appetite together with the consciousness of appetite. Loosely translated, I can hear only desire in that. A privileged moment that nestles all the tenses inside each other and swirls them all together as they remain still, as they must. For time doesn't really exist. It's just numbers boxing the weather in, because otherwise everything would be beyond recognition, beyond reason, beyond refusal to being born. There's a whole bunch of other stuff going on in the poem that might help make a bit more sense. But
So you've got this line from Spinoza near the end of this section that says, appetite together with the consciousness of appetite. And so that's one of the points in this poem where I paused and thought about it. And then you talk about desire, and I was thinking, desire frames this in some very, eloquent ways like Spinoza, and then your references to Trump, which are also, desire, kind of unbridled desire. There's this idea of desire. How does it frame at least this section of the poem?
I guess what the poem desires most of all, as the title, I suppose, makes explicit, the title being On the Image, is a desire to stop time, which is what I try to get at with all the tenses being nestled together and then stilled, because stopping time, which is impossible, obviously, is a worthwhile exercise for a variety of reasons, especially if you're a poet. But it's also helpful, especially in this city, to try to slow things down makes life a bit more manageable, at least for me. I find the city to be overwhelmingly abrupt and oppressive and fast. So to try to have this exercise of desiring to go and then look around and see what's going on. What can I make of that? And I think that's what this poem is largely a meditation on, of trying to stop time, try, and see what results.
And your previous collection of poetry, Still Life, right? Like you're kind of doing that in the poems there too, right?
Yeah.
The idea of stopping time and taking a look.
Yeah. Yep.
Cool.
Trying. Yeah.
I don't wanna sully that with a question.
Okay. All right. Next poem. All right. Let's see. Do I want to do this? Yeah. All right. Well, I got to do it. I wrote the damn thing. I got to do it. This next poem is called On Depression, something I've had since I was yay big, about 8. I wasn't diagnosed and treated for it until 20 years later. I just figured that's kind of what life was, like, and it's impossible to write about. It's impossible to talk about, though we should try. And I can't say this with any certainty, but it's my belief that each of us who has this strange affliction of the mind experiences it differently. There are some commonalities, of course, but I think at its core, each depression experience is unique in its own way. So to write about it is impossible, but I got to try. So in this poem, I try to find a way into writing about depression by testing out a variety of poetic forms. I talk about the villanelle, I talk about the sestina, I talk about the prose poem. And I think that's perhaps all of the contextualizing information that you might need, okay? This is On Depression. I'm writing this down now because I'm not in it. And because when I am, I can't. I'm wondering if I should write as fast as I can, or if I should fully give myself over to form, something ancient, reliable, almost prescribed so I don't give in to melodrama, bloated self-pity, easy abstraction, and all the other plagues I fear that really do reveal who I am, reveal who we all might be. A villanelle or sestina maybe, something necessarily repetitive and ruminative, a tight, suffocating arrangement of rooms that have no doors, at least when I build them, or like a house of mirrors at a carnival. Or maybe I should dive into the slipstream of a prose poem. Imbued by an image, let syntax and the scattered rhythms and timbres of my psyche carry me away into a darkness visible only to the suicides and the God, my God too, who has blessed them. Maybe an epic could distill its size and scope into a shape that would keep historians, scholars, and other puzzled onlookers busy for centuries. You see? Bullshit. All bullshit. It can't be written about. And now, I can feel it coming. Or more likely, something like it. Because all along I've been trying to summon it. That's not how it works. It is a floating thing, a hovering, and always about to strike, a cocky snicker when I flinch. And now I am not. Something is faded, is fading, always fading. And I'm sorry. I'm always so sorry, and I have no idea why.
So often, as a classroom professor, when teaching literature, people want to talk about the relationship between mental illness and creativity. Do you want to talk about the relationship
try.
between mental illness and
I
creativity?
can try. I don't know if it'll make any sense, but I'll try. I was mulling your question when you sent it to me.
For a different poem, by the way.
Yeah.
That you didn't read.
Yeah, but it most certainly applies.
It's here too.
It applies to this as well. And I typed up a very long response, and then I read
That
it.
doesn't sound healthy.
No, it was not healthy, and it was not useful, and it didn't make much sense. And I think the only sort of concrete thing that I can land on about the relationship between my faulty wiring and my creative processes is that I'm going to have faulty wiring anyway. Might as well get something damn good out of it. So at least I got that. Because, you know, there are plumbers, there are accountants, there are truck drivers, there are nurses, there are
Yes.
who have the same thing. And I hope they have means to deal with it. Maybe they're all closet poets and painters and musicians, but second concrete thing, not the only concrete, I mean, I got it anyway, I might as well take advantage. I might as well try to get some revenge on it, so to speak. And I also find that, no, I'm going to change my mind. I didn't say what I was going to say, so you don't know what I'm changing my mind about. But I was going to say something to the effect that, you know, that mental anguish, I don't know how else to put it, that mental anguish is a kind of muse. No, it's not. It's bullshit. It's debilitating. It's silencing. It's senseless. It's musicless. It's shapeless. It's actually a detriment. It's a silencer. It's only when I come out of it can I feel kind of rejuvenated to get back to work. So I was going to say that mental illness is a blessing for the artist. Oh, well, no. Fuck no. No, it's not. It's not. Pardon me. It's not. Yeah.
My question segues nicely with that, I think, because you're talking about the paralysis that's brought on by depression, and but I think you already kind of answered it, because I was wondering, how does paralysis interact with when you're trying to come out with some kind of content, and how do you pick form? Because you spend a lot of time in this poem. The speaker is talking about, like, I can't find a form. I feel paralyzed, and so it's brilliant in a way, because what you've done is kind of put down into a poem the debilitating way that this mental illness can put you in paralysis, and the speaker is in paralysis because they can't decide on form.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, that's it's cool. I didn't really bring that together till just now. So. Thanks, man.
All right. Hey. You're welcome. Shall we go on to the title poem? Right? Let's skip it. Yeah. Let's go on to the title poem. The title poem, On Distance, is not letting me find it. Here it is. It is, a 22-page, 9-section, I don't know how many words it is, a couple thousand, meditative elegy for a friend from my childhood who killed himself, and he's been on my shoulder and in my ear ever since. That happened, we were 18, so 1990, something like that. I have his dates here. It's sometimes 95, okay, yeah, he's 23. And another friend who killed himself when I was 18. He's not amused yet. Excuse me, I'm going to read section 3. And my friend, I'd call him B, just the initial B, period. And if you don't know who Louis Thornton Powell is, you might want to do a Google search and just do a Google search under images. You'll find the photograph that I'm referencing, trying to talk about in this poem. But the person I'm addressing is my friend B, who's been dead for 24, 25 years now. Okay. So, that photograph of Lewis Thornton Powell, I'd found and folded and slipped as a kind of poultice between pages for words that have faced each other for decades, maybe longer. Maybe it wasn't needed at all. Maybe all along, all you've been trying to say is sit. There's plenty of ice and wind to go around, but not now, not just yet. Sit. Look at all these generations of sparrows at the feeders, these swarms of lightning bugs drinking in the air of early summer, a mourning dove's early morning coo, and your favorite, the geese. Sit. Look at how all of this takes forever. Let me take my life now and set it inside all of this fluttering and singing before we break apart again. Before we break apart again into constellations, into the sky's shape at the end of Elmwood and Sharon Avenue that resembles fire, its shape, which might be the shape of the soul, into every damaged fiber of my lungs that fills with surprise whenever I try to understand why you chose to go, and fills with surprise whenever I fail to understand how it never was a choice for you. Loosening the shackles of light and air and love. You freed yourself the way dust is punched from a pillow and floats long past the eye's endurance, and inscribed yourself into an impossible line or two in that story by Melville. I would prefer not to. I struggle to pick up those photographs of you that can't exist now, because you claimed quietly and calmly that you never wanted a birth, and gathered up suicide into your own two hands, breathed into it and raised it in your own likeness. Am I supposed to believe in afterlives diagrammed in a grammar that accepts suicide as a dialect? Something like singing only the dead like you are permitted to hear? It must be that the soul is capable of shattering before the body is ready to put itself back together. That the voice in those photographs I have of us has tried to replace everyone I love over and over. I must need to see our faces tilted a little to the left in a fogged mirror I've wiped clear with soap and a towel just after a shower, before our day has begun. I must want you to see us clearly and believe before we break apart again, unfinished.
So, I have to say, I wish you all could hear the whole thing. This is probably my favorite poem of the last decade that was written. It's gorgeous. And there's so much going on, right? We have the description of the images. We've got Mary Oliver's Wild Geese being referenced. We have Bartleby the Scrivener. But let's talk about form, right? So as we're describing this as your friend kind of breaking apart from you, and the desire to go back in time, but also to be with, and, well, so many things. How do you choose the form? I actually, as a good English professor, right, I sat down with this thing and did the scansion, like, okay, how many feet are here, and how many lines, right? So it's mostly couplets and singlets, and honestly, there's some maybe metrical sort of thing going on. You can tell me, I couldn't quite find it. But what choices are you making, and why?
Well, more generally speaking, I'll know after a draft, or even as early as a couple lines, I'll know what, I begin to hear what the poem wants to be, formally. If it's something a bit more directly narrative, I'll probably end up casting something in blank verse, something unrhymed iambic pentameter that will hold up a narrative. Mm-hmm. If it's something more meditative and sort of paratactical, leaping subjects, blah, 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 all over the place, then I've found that these sort of floating couplets and singlets kind of help enhance that airiness to the subject, and it also helps me maintain that sort of meditative voice that's also sort of non-committal.
And I will say, for those of you who don't have the benefit of reading it, this is the first time I've ever heard it read, right? And it's so personal to me. This is my poem, Alex, it's not yours.
You can have it. I'm done with it.
But I've been reading it, and you feel the space and the emptiness on the page in a way that may or may not come across from a reading.
Yeah. That's a helpful comment. And I think also specifically with this poem, with all the white, there's lots of white space in this poem,
Yes.
lots of negative space. And I think I was trying to use those couplets and singlets as a counterpoint of they suggest a lightness, a floating, an airiness, to counterpoint the absolute heaviness of the subject matter. Because if the form of the poem were as heavy as the content, it would just, I wouldn't have been able to get it done. It would have crushed, the poem would have crushed me. And it already did, but I got it done. So, yeah.
I can't read it without crying.
I'm sorry. And yes.
That's why I go to poetry. I like those feelings. They're good.
Okay. Well, thank you. That's a wonderful compliment. Thank you.
My question is about Powell. You use him as a framing device for this entire section. Why and how are you using him?
I wish I had a smart response. I really don't. Those of you who do know the image, it's an absolutely striking image that I'm referencing here. And Powell was convicted of being a conspirator of the assassination of Lincoln. And he was convicted and he was hung. And this photograph was taken of him on board a ship, the USS Saugus, and that's where they kept him imprisoned before they executed him. And this is the infant stage of photography. And this photograph catches Powell, and he's in cuffs, and he's just staring into the photograph, and his eyes are absolutely striking.
Piercing.
It's an absolutely chilling, beautiful, stunning, terrifying photograph. And probably not going to believe this, but it's true for whatever it's worth. He is a dead ringer for B. And I don't remember why I found this photograph. I don't remember why I was searching it. I'm sort of a Civil War nerd, and maybe I was searching for something regarding the Civil War, and that came up, and it just sucked me in. It had like a vortex to it. And I thought I was looking at B again. And I thought, I got to get that into a poem someday. Yeah. And that was maybe like 15 years ago.
So you had an ekphrastic moment 15 years ago and saved it up until it came out.
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. You want to go on to the...
read the...
Do we have time for the last one?
I think I have to read it. Do we have time for one more? Okay.
Read it, and we won't ask questions.
Yeah, this is maybe, this has been a heavy, I understand this has been heavy, all of it. This poem is titled, I'm Also Going to Speak of Hope, and it's the last poem in the book. And it's modeled after the Peruvian poet Cesar Vallejo, his poem, I'm Going to Speak of Hope. Even if I wanted to explain the suffering, I couldn't. Just saying suffering fills me with shame. Me, with my good heart, liver, and lungs, with friends who don't let me lie, my wife who also doesn't let me lie, and our two cats who sleep at our feet and on our heads, who are growing older, truer, like a couple of oak trees, and not the least of all my students who show up and listen to what my teachers have given me to pass along. My white hands do as I command. My brown eyes take in the blue sky. My white back absorbs 50, 60-pound loads up 4 or 5 flights of stairs for hours on end until those around me give up. But today, like yesterday, I simply suffer. There's nothing to explain it, nothing to fear, to confess, to rage against. My suffering runs so deep it isn't even mine. Am I so special as to suffer like no one else? I've spoken to God about this, as I'm doing right now, and his response is always the same. You are who you are until you are not anymore. Until then, you suffer. One day I will press him on what who you are and not anymore and until then mean. Not today. Today, like tomorrow, I will simply suffer. In the New York Times, I see a soldier's suffering. The left side of his face melted away, skin as pink and smooth as Rosalind. And I'm filled with shame and know that his suffering couldn't be more different from my own. On television, there are bodies wrapped in white sheets and arranged in rows in a shelled hospital in Aleppo. Mothers, wives, and sisters and daughters wailing, and I'm filled with shame because their suffering couldn't be further from my own. If my wife's plane crashes into the sea without memory and her body is never recovered, and every dream I have from that day forward fills with her terror-stricken face, and her voice tears with screams no throat could bear, I'm filled with shame because even though her suffering will have become my suffering, it isn't. If I had been born a lawyer or a banker, or if I worked the graveyard shift as a clerk at a 7-Eleven, instead of a writer, and never had my white hands tremble after reading Vallejo, I doubt I'd be able to speak about hope, which is, I'm learning, always furnished with flecks of dust traveling through bars of sunlight. I believe today the things I believed yesterday. Will believe them tomorrow and the day after that. My suffering fills me with shame. I water our potted lemon tree that hasn't yielded fruit for 5 years. It's over 7 feet tall, and its thorns draw blood whenever I prune its dead and sticky leaves. I don't wince or curse when it bites me, not anymore. I give it water every day and make sure it's positioned to catch the sun. Thank you.
Thank you for ending on a hopeful note, but I think that there is so much to unpack in this book, and it's really, I just appreciate Dr. Pease and Dr. Barleben so much for helping to tease out some of the meaning behind and hidden inside those lines. So we have a couple of minutes. We can start with some audience questions.
I can hear you, Caitlin. It's all right.
Okay, good. Okay. Yeah. So this is like referring back to the poem on depression.
Mm-hmm.
So you start off by saying you're writing before it comes back, and then you like speak about how you're trying to summons it. So by referring to depression as it, are you trying to like avoid it altogether, or are you trying to like force it out to help you finish writing?
Probably more the former. I think I'm trying to avoid it. And I don't want to name it. I don't want to give it that respect. But it's in the damn title, so. So, yeah, probably more the former. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. My question was about the poem about your father-in-law. You said cancer killed him before he was shot.
Say it again?
Did you say in the poem cancer killed him before
No, it killed his wife.
Killed his wife before.
Yeah.
Misinterpretation, never mind.
That would be kind of difficult to pull off, wouldn't it? Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Also on depression, this is not so much a question as much as a comment or an insight that, like when you hear the poem, when I heard you read it, that I thought about. Again, that same comment about writing about depression or describing it as it. Maybe not so much depression, but in depressive states or moments in my life, I like to turn to self-help books. And then once I feel like I'm out of that, out of it feels like I'm just bored by them, or I don't want to read them, or they're depressing in themselves. So I understand.
Yeah.
As ironic as that sounds.
Yeah.
I understand that kind of going in and out of it, and not wanting to give it a name. So I really appreciate that as well.
Thank you. Yeah. And those self-help books, they're Hey, whatever works. I'm not going to disparage
That's
them,
right.
but they did.
Until you need them.
Until you need them. Yeah, so they serve as reliable bookends for other books. Until you need them. Until you need them. Kellyanne?
Wow.
Yeah.
If you don't use the mic, the camera can.
People like the mics.
And then you won't be recorded. This is more of a general question. I just wanted to say that sharing personal moments isn't something easy to do. So I wanted to know, like, what pushed you to, like, create this book and share it with the world?
That's a good question. I think the poems kind of didn't give me a choice. It sounds like a cop-out. Of course, I could have not written the poems. And I think this came out in 2018, but I think I've been writing this book probably since I was about 8 years old, unconsciously. Unconsciously. And I think it was just something, some things I needed to try to objectify, to get out, so as maybe to relieve some of their power and some of the debilitating force that it's had on my life, these experiences. So getting them out, well, cathartic to an extent. I think it's more than that. Helps me make some sense of them. And I also hope that it's not I hope it's not a solipsistic book. I hope it doesn't come across as me. I'm trying to place myself kind of in a much larger context. Whether that's successful or not is not up to me to decide. I tried, and so I don't know if I'm answering your question. Yeah.
Perhaps in that vein, I know we haven't
There you are.
had the benefit of hearing from some of your previous works, but do you feel that this collection has some distinctive qualities as opposed to the rest of your work, or some similarities that you want to discuss?
Well, some similarities would probably be the obsession with the ekphrastic, or still life, trying to still time and meditate on images or an image. Other similarities, the jazz, rock stuff comes in. Sort of the usual suspects always seem to come up in poems, and I got to find some new usual suspects for the next book. Differences, I think, I got the longest poems I've ever written in here. And I think this is the book I'm proudest of. Even though the previous book won a bunch of prizes, and that's all poetry biz stuff that's just kind of icky. And, sometimes it's who you know, sometimes it's on merit, and oftentimes it's who you know and it's who you have coffee with, and, prizes. But this, it's the book I'm proudest of because I guess in terms from a process perspective, I had help. I have my reliable stable of readers to whom I send stuff, but this one is largely all on me, and I'm proud of that too. Of course, I did send it to my stable in its what I thought was its most complete form, and they gave me edits back, but they said that this doesn't need much. I think you got it. I said I know. But it's always nice to be, I'm not crazy either. Well, at least in this instance, I had a moment of clarity. And it's like, yeah, I think I got it. Yeah. Maheen?
Hi, I just wanted to say that was beautiful. It was so perfectly constructed. And when you were talking about on depression and grappling with trying to reconcile what role like your depression plays in your creativity. And I think what you were trying to get at is that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that
No, I'm all
when you
ears,
were going,
please.
when you were going back and forth between deciding what to say is that I think that it's healthier to think about it as something that moves through you instead of something that defines you, the same way inspiration does. And I feel like it's important because a lot of writers and artists often deal with if I'm not depressed, then, what am I going to do with my art? Because then it's over. It's kind of like writing something amazing, and then it's like, okay, I wrote something great, now what?
Yeah.
But if you treat it like inspiration, like something that moves through you and then out of you, and then through you and out of you, the way life does, maybe it's a little bit, maybe it makes it a little bit more sane. I don't know if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense.
But yeah,
Absolutely.
I thought that was great.
Oh, thank you. And too bad you're going to law school because you probably get into psychotherapy or something. But you're young. You'll figure it out. You do both. Yeah. Toy. Jay.
Thank you for this beautiful book. I just wondered which poem crystallized, not which one you wrote first, but which poem crystallized the whole book for you? Because I noticed, on this, on that, it seems as if the whole book belongs together. But what was the poem that you wrote when you realized there was a whole book here?
That poem is one of the kind of B-sides, if you will, or C-sides, D-sides, Z-sides. Probably on Attention, which is on page 68. It's like a C- poem. It's like, But I remember where I was. I was living in Hoboken at the time, and I would take the New York waterway to get to here. And it was a miserable January, February day, and the ferries were not running on time because the Hudson was blah, blah, blah. So sitting in inside, and I was just antsy and bored and pissed off, so I went outside. I smoked at the time, so I had a cigarette. And I remembered a day, my first day going up to John Jay from the New York waterway. The New York waterway drops you off right, I don't know if it's a Chinese embassy, but there's the Chinese consulate, something, big building, and there are always protesters outside. Falun Gong, I believe, were protesting there. And I was just astonished. I wasn't a New Yorker yet, and I was just kind of like, I'm just getting, sensory assault. Just like, and I wasn't even really in New York yet. I was still like on the Hudson. I was still technically in Jersey, and I was like, holy shit, this is. And I'm from Philly. Philly's a small town compared to, and I remember seeing the Falun Gong protesters. They just stood there with their arms up for what seemed forever. I was like, I can't. I'm going to have to put them down like now. I can like, ugh. And I just stood there, just amazed, looking at them. And in my non-New Yorkerness, I stopped right in the middle of the bike path and walkway, and I just got boom by two guys walking, and they were, they're big dudes, and they were, they F you to me, F you. I'm like, oh, I guess I'm in New York. Yeah, I'm in New York now. And I heard them. So all the cliches are true. How about that? And I heard them start to just rattle off all these racial slurs at the Falun Gong. And I thought, I think I got a book. I think I got a book. And then that was 2008. So it took me 10 years to figure all that out. And it's not a terribly good poem, but it was the first one, so I thought I better be faithful to it and put it in there. Just kind of squeeze it in the middle somewhere so, nobody's going to find it. Jay, did you have a hand? Sure.
How do you want people to hear your poetry? And I ask that because there's the experience of reading a poem, right, and, like Allison said, sort of puzzling through what all of the technique is. And then there's the performance of a poem. Mm-hmm. And I find that your voice, your written voice, is very precise. It's often very reflective, but the the diction is very specific, right? It feels like the right word to express what you're trying to express.
Thank you.
And I have the experience of reading it and of knowing you and of having heard you read your own poetry. And I don't hear your voice when I read, which it seems stupid, right? But when I hear you read your own poetry, it's often like you're on your way to either dismissing it or like you're questioning what you already put on the page and sort of, is that the word that I want? And so I guess all of that is embedded in my question of, how do you want your poetry heard?
I would prefer my delivery be more confident, more deliberate as it is on the page, because when I'm writing it, when I'm by myself, when I'm drafting them, I'm good. I'm really effing good, right? You have to tell, if you're a writer, you got to tell these things to yourself. He's like, I'm the effing man. I'm the woman. I'm it. I'm the bomb. Blah blah blah. And then you step back and you go, okay, where's Shakespeare? Reality check. Where's Shakespeare? Where's Yeats? Where's Levis? Where's Dickinson? Let's you had your little high. Now come back, and that's where the self-doubt comes in, because I'm thinking of all my mentors and my heroes, and I'm thinking, oh, this doesn't hold a candle to. But I wrote it, so I got to stick to it. I'm not going to torch it, and I do. There are poems. This is maybe. When I was answering Rachel's question, this is the book I'm proudest of, and this is the first maybe batch of poems that I felt consistently really confident in. And I think I just need to get there in my delivery, if I'm understanding your question correctly, that when, just now, like the past hour, I'm just kind of very tentative and doubting, sort of testing it rather than delivering, giving it. I think that's something I need to work on.
But in your absence.
Oh.
So if you're not there then, to
I mean,
perform
I'm not
it the
going
way
to be,
that you
I'm not going
want,
to be there
or
all the time?
I keep my door closed. How do you want your audience to hear your work, to experience it?
Definitely what's on the page, because that's what's going to last. This is going to go. Hopefully, this is going to be around at least a little bit longer, and that's why I choose the choices I make are very precise, because I have to get as close to what the muse has given me. Because a lot gets lost in translation. What's here isn't always what's up here. It has to go through some channels, and in that process, things get lost. But I have to try to make it as precise and as vivid as I can, and that's what I would prefer. Be taken. Audrey?
So I think this will have to be our last one.
I feel your spirituality in your work. Whether you
Not
want
my religious faith anymore.
That's
but in my
okay. Whether you want to
spirituality.
acknowledge it or not, it comes through because we are what we are. Sometimes we can't get away from who we are.
I've tried.
Having said that, because of your upbringing, do you have a preconceived notion on forgiveness? And if you do, are there levels of forgiveness that you need to tap into? And are you able to forgive yourself at any point in time for any of the misdeeds that you've done throughout the course of your life?
Last part first. Yeah, finally. And there's other stuff. that I have a list, and usually it's time. It's the passage of time. Always, yeah. I had Catholic dogma just hammered into me, so all the Catholic dogma about forgiveness is in there, and it's hard to extract. If I'm not alert, I just sort of revert into it. And of course, being Catholic, I was born bad. Right out of the womb, sin. Hey, what did I do? You know. So there's that hanging over me, and I know that's a bunch of shit, but it's there. I haven't forgiven the church yet. I don't know if I ever will. No, they just want my money. They want me to pass around the plate, and here you go. Yeah, okay. And if any practicing Catholics in here, I'm not sorry. I hope your relationship with your faith is a productive and helpful one. Are there levels to forgiveness? Absolutely. With me, yeah. And I think I know when I'm there, when I've gotten there, when I've forgiven someone, it's like, oh, okay, it's done. There's no more angst, there's no more animosity, there's no more noise. I know that sounds kind of vague in general, but it's just that emotional, like, it's like, okay, let me think about what happened. It's like, nah, asshole, see ya, that kind of thing. But it takes a long time to get from the incident to that kind of, all right, I guess I'll do some laundry now. You know, that kind of thing. You just get on with my day, just put it aside. It's been put aside. So maybe it's been put aside for me. Maybe I didn't put it aside. It's been put aside for me. I don't know. God's around. God's certainly there. God's certainly around. Just the Catholic stuff is, I ain't buying it no more. Yeah.
Alex, thank you so much again. If you could all give him a round of applause, please.